We are here discussing the Federal CARES Act. My name is Rachel Seymour Kiesling. I'm with the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce. I serve as the Biloxi Division Director as well as Operations Manager. And joining us today is Ms. Adele Lyons, our CEO, and Ms. Tish Williams, the CEO of the Hancock County Chamber, or actually Executive Director. I think I got your title wrong. I apologize, Tish. And of course,
bottle washer.
And of course, Moore Hallmark with U.S. Chamber, and we're going to hear a little bit about him later. But Ms. Adele, you want to give us some chamber remarks real quick from the Coast Chamber?
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. And this will be recorded, and we will be sharing this on our Facebook page, as well as the other chambers will share it on their Facebook page as well. So if you miss something or something gets past you as we're talking, you can certainly refer back to that. Give us a couple hours to get that ready and get that up, and we'll be sharing some links to some of the resources that Moore is going to talk about as well. So you'll have those. Those will also be posted on our coronavirus resource page on our website, which is mscoastchamber.com, and I'm sure Tish is going to do the same, and I believe Paige Roberts from Jackson County Chamber is out there as well. She'll do the same. We just want to make sure all this information gets into everybody's hands. For the Chamber, for the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber, our mission is to connect, inform, advocate, and develop. And certainly we're connecting today in a different way than we have known in the past. And certainly there's a lot of information that we're going to be providing to you. Also, the chambers, including the U.S. Chamber, are certainly advocating for small business by trying to share this information to you and get it out to you. So we're really hitting on all cylinders there. I want to go ahead and read an intro. Tish, let's see what Tish has to say this morning before we get started.
Well, I just want to say hi to everybody and thank Adele and Rachel and the team at the Coast Chamber for collaborating with the Hancock Chamber, the Jackson Chamber, and the U.S. Chamber on this important webinar. And I also want to thank the U.S. Chamber because they have provided timely and relevant information from the minute this pandemic hit. We have been provided with amazing fact sheets that we have been able to then pass on to our members. And we too have been posting it on our website and pushing out on our social media sources. And we would not have been able to do this if we were not a member of the U.S. Chamber. And I think that this demonstrates why it's so important for people to be a member of a trade organization and a local chamber of commerce, because our job is to provide you with the information you need to be able to make important decisions that are affecting your business. And I hope that we've done that. As I've talked to our members throughout this time, I'm very impressed with how they have taken that information and they've put it to work. And hopefully they're going to find out more about these three main programs that are available to our businesses. So thanks for joining us and look forward to hearing more from Moore.
So let me introduce Moore real quick. Moore Hallmark is the Executive Director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Office of Congressional Affairs. Moore oversees congressional and public affairs for 8 southeastern states, including Mississippi. The mission of the Southeast Regional Office is to develop and maintain the region's legislative, political, and grassroots resources to achieve the U.S. Chamber public policy goals. Moore has a political science degree from the University of Mississippi. I know that's important to some of y'all. And a public relations degree from the University of North Alabama. Rachel, do we need to cover anything else before we jump in?
No, I think we can go ahead and get on with it. You can suggest, enter your questions on the Q&A portion, and we will try to keep up with those as much as possible. We are going to try not to address duplicate questions, but Moore, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel and Tish and Adele. Thank you guys for the invitation opportunity to join you today. Thank you Tish, thank you for the very kind remarks about the Chamber as well. We've done our very best to try to provide you and your colleagues in the chambers around the country with the most up-to-date and best information that we can, so that you can use that with your members as you're on the front lines, talking to your members on a daily basis on how and what to do. So I appreciate you saying that. We're also very appreciative of the partnership we have with your chambers. it's vitally important that we all work together. And so we are appreciative of that and the efforts that you're doing and leading your chambers and your communities through this difficult time. There is a full-on PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to kind of skim through a couple of things, but really kind of focus a little bit more of my time on kind of where the small businesses are most interested in through the CARES Act. As you know, though, and this is a $2.5 or $2.3 trillion package, the CARES Act. It's the third, by the way. Keep in mind, Congress, in an unlikely manner, have worked on a very bipartisan basis to pass three major pieces of legislation within a month's time. There was the first bill that was an $8 billion package that went to funding and assisting in hospitals and the CDC and others and some initial testing stuff and needs. Then there was the Families First Act, which focused largely on test kits and then funding mandates on unemployment programs and paid leave programs. And then the third bill, the CARES Act, is the one that was largely addressed to helping support small businesses, even in mid-size and larger companies as well, local governments, nonprofits, and individual taxpayers. There are this legislation was really with a purpose of trying to secure funds and assisting businesses that could make the difference in them keeping their doors open over these next several weeks, keeping their employees, trying to prevent any reduction in salaries and staff, and or shutting down their doors. There is the automatic payouts for individual taxpayers. You're aware of those. If you make less than $75,000 and file your taxes as an individual, there's a $1,200 tax or money that you will receive. This isn't a credit. This is a flat out money that you'll be deposited in your account or delivered in your mailbox. And or if you file jointly as a married couple or jointly, that threshold is $150,000. You should get a $2,400 check or money deposited in your account plus $500 per child. There are monies above that amount, but that will be proportionally reduced or phased down based on that income. And then there's a number of benefits regarding or expansions to unemployment, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those in the Q&A if you would like to. But kind of going on and through some of the other provisions, there are provisions, and Rachel, I'll let you go ahead and turn the slide. Thank you. There are tax provisions for all employers. There are loan guarantees for some of the larger employers, particularly in the airline industry and the national security industry. And then what I'll focus the most of my time on before opening up to questions are the programs to assist small businesses, the self-employed, independent contractors, nonprofits, and more. As far as some of the tax provisions, there are payroll tax deferrals. There are various things like that will help all employees in this case, and it's all with a purpose on these tax provisions is to with really one sole purpose, and that is to try to provide some liquidity to businesses, give them more money so that they can keep their doors open and pay their employees and pay the utility bills and so forth. And that's what those tax provisions are largely there for, to assist. And so if you're a small business or even a large business and you're looking at what benefits do I have through the CARES Act, in addition to either, some of these loans, what are some of those tax provisions I need to be aware of? And I just encourage you to talk to your tax professional about some of those as well. With regards to another provision, and this came up in a discussion I was having with Adele earlier before we started the call, a lot of businesses, small businesses that is, and Rachel, go ahead and turn the slide if you want to. Go ahead and turn it one more time if you don't mind. Great, thanks. There is the employee retention credit. This has kind of come up, she said, in a number of conversations with some of her members there along the coast. And this is what I would suggest to businesses that are trying to debate whether or not they should apply for the PPP loan or the EIDL loans through the SBA, or should they just maybe rely upon some of this employee retention tax credit as well. That is something that I can't really advise you on, but it's something certainly that you need to, as a business, seriously consider what is more viable to you and is going to provide you more money at this time, and so forth as well. And so I'll quickly go through the provisions of the retention credit, and then we'll kind of get into the other loan programs and stuff as well. First off, private employers, including nonprofits, are eligible for the employee retention tax credit if your business operations were either A, fully or partially suspended due to the COVID-19 shutdown, or a decline in gross receipts by more than 50% in a quarter compared to that same quarter of 2019. So I would just say, for example, I guess maybe you could take the first quarter of this year, or maybe use the second quarter, which we're in now, and compare that to last year's first or second quarter to determine, do you have a 50% drop in your gross receipts over that same quarter? Now, eligible businesses can get a 50% or refundable 50% tax credit for the first $10,000 of compensation, including the employer portion of health benefits for each eligible employee. Now, however, that compensation does not include paid sick or family leave. Now, when you're determining who is eligible, what employees are eligible, for those employers with 100 or more employees, the rule is if full-time employees who are being paid but are not providing any services due to the partial shutdown count towards eligibility. Now, if your employer with 100 or less employees, then all employees, regardless of whether or not they're providing any services or not during this shutdown period, they count towards eligibility. Now, the credit applies to wages paid after March the 12th and before January 1st of 2021. This is the point in which I kind of reference, this is where you need to kind of decide what works best for you potentially. If you're an employer and you've applied and received the Paycheck Protection Loan, you're not eligible to take out this retention tax credit as well. So that's kind of where you have to consider what's more feasible for me and more beneficial for me and my business at this point. Do I apply, get, and then potentially with the loan forgiveness of the PPP, or do I kind of go with the the employee retention credit here on your taxes and stuff? So that is something you'll have to kind of consider and think about. Talk to your tax preparer as well as maybe your lender and kind of figure out what maybe works best for you. As I mentioned a moment ago, there were, and go ahead and change the slide, Rachel. Thank you very much. As I mentioned a moment ago, there are some loan guarantees for some other industries, particularly the airline industry and national security industry. These are loans to those industries, not bailouts. So there was $25 billion in loans and loan guarantees for air carriers, $4 billion in cargo air carriers, and $17 billion for businesses to help maintain our national security. There were also restrictions on stock buybacks and executive compensations, and we won't need to get into all of that right now. But anyway, so mid-sized and large employers are also looked at in this legislation as well. Now, the next slide, Rachel, this is where I'll spend the majority of my time, and then we'll open it up to questions regarding anything that I covered and or maybe didn't cover, and try to do my best to answer those questions for you. This bill largely was kind of focused on helping small businesses, including self-employed, independent contractors, nonprofits, and others. This is the section, the Paycheck Protection Program is the largest section of the CARES Act, and is probably the most important provision in the stimulus bill for small businesses. This program set aside nearly $350 billion in government-backed loans for small businesses, self-employed, sole proprietors, freelancers, gig economy workers, independent contractors, and more. And it's all based off or modeled off the existing SBA 7(a) loan program, which many businesses are already aware of. A business can get 2.5 times amount of monthly average of monthly payroll, plus an additional 25% of that amount, or up to $10 million. $10 million is the maximum amount someone can get. Those payroll costs are calculated by adding up all compensation. So it's your salaries, wages, tips, Plus, you can calculate or include your paid vacation time, paid sick leave, health benefits, and more with respect to those employees. From that amount, then you subtract your payroll taxes, income taxes, and any amount above the $100,000 threshold. So in essence, if you've got employees who make over $100,000 and have all the benefits of the health benefits and vacation, all kinds of stuff, it doesn't matter beyond the $100,000 mark. That is the cap in which you can use to calculate your payroll tax is that $100,000 mark. Lenders can defer, and then after you subtract those amounts and anything beyond the $100,000, which again doesn't calculate, then that's the sum of your payroll cost. Now, lenders can defer the fees, principal, and interest for these loans for no more than a year at a rate of 1%, and that loan is due in 2 years' time. There's a little bit of a restriction on what you can use these loans for. There are really only 4 things: covering your payroll cost, your interest on your mortgage, rent, and utilities. Loans will be issued by local and national lenders, and as I said, there are about 800 national qualified lenders through the SBA before this legislation, and this legislation expanded that number to virtually just about any lender, bank lenders, credit unions, and others who are allowed to give these loans out. And they're still trying to qualify a lot of those folks. But on the website, on SBA's website, you can go to, and you have to kind of find it now. I was looking for it before the call earlier today for someone else, but there is a loan finder. And so you can go on there, enter in your zip code, and it'll pull up all the qualified lenders in your immediate area where you could go to talk to. Obviously, if you have a personal relationship with a lender at your bank and stuff, those would be the ones you'd want to talk to first, obviously. There are also minimal requirements to obtain these loans. There's no personal guarantee or collateral used or required. Loans convert to grants. Now, this is kind of the big thing. These are loans, but they turn to grants if to the equal amount that is paid on payroll cost, again, rent, utilities, and interest on your mortgage rates. They have to be used for that over the 8-week period after the origination of the loan. So not when the law was passed, but after the loan is approved and granted. Once that loan goes into effect, then you have 8 weeks through that period. So in essence, as long as an employer continues paying their employees at their normal rates or no less than 75% of their rate during that time period, then that loan can be forgiven. And obviously with those other caveats, utilities, rent, and interest on your mortgage rates. Now, the loan forgiveness is reduced proportionally, though, if an employer reduces the number of full-time employees or reduces the wages of their employees by more than 25%. So, for example, if an employer laid off any workers between February the 15th and April the 26th, which were still a few weeks away, they can avoid a reduction in forgiveness if they bring those employees back to work and pay them at least 75% of their wage before June the 30th. If they do not do so and there are additional changes, reduction in pay or reduction in staff after the 26th and before and between the 30th, that forgiveness is reduced proportionately. The last thing I'll kind of mention regarding the PPP loans is if the full principal of the PPP loan is forgiven, the borrower is not responsible for any interest accrued in that 8-week cover period. However, the part of the loan that remains after the 8 weeks is not forgiven, then it is subject to the loan terms agreed upon you and your lender. Keep in mind, you have to go to your lender, a bank or financial institution for these loans, not the SBA. There are guidelines on the SBA's website regarding the Paycheck protection programs, but they're not the ones granting these loans. Rachel, go ahead and change the next slide. Thank you. This is just a picture of a document that we created a few weeks back, shared with the local chambers, who in essence then turned around and hopefully shared it with all of you, small businesses on the line and in their memberships. This was a great document that kind of regarding the Paycheck Protection Program called the Coronavirus Emergency Loan Small Business Guide and Checklist. This goes through who's qualified, what are lenders looking for, how do you calculate your payroll cost, all of that kind of information. That is in a kind of a 4-page document there. It's very simple to read and understand. It kind of walks you through the process. We have also created similar documents that look just like it that are one-pagers that talk about the employee retention tax credit and also the EIDL loans, which I'll talk about in just a second. But if you go to the uschamber.com /coronavirus website, you can go to SB loans as well, but the coronavirus, you'll see all of our resources, including the applications to file for these loans and so forth. Those are there as well. So I encourage you to go to the website, take a look at our all of our resources and all of this information, and hopefully it'll help answer any questions you have as you prepare for loans and talk to your lenders and so forth going forward as well. Rachel? This will be the last slide I'll talk about. Then we'll kind of turn it over to you guys and answer any questions you have as well. The other opportunity for assistance, and let me kind of mention this as well. When Congress passed this bill, and keep in mind, they did this in a very short amount of time, so it's not a perfect bill. No bill ever is, even if it's taken months and years to prepare and pass after much deliberation and debate. This they did in a matter of really just a couple of weeks and passed very quickly. I used the analogy with Adele and Tish and Rachel earlier before the call began. Probably the best analogy I could say for this whole program, not just the EIDL loan program, but this entire piece of legislation, is they did it very quickly. They did it bipartisanly, and then kind of turned it over to the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and SBA to kind of work out the kinks on the interpretation of what the law is intended to do. But it's almost like they've built they are building a plane after the plane has already taken off and is flying. They're still working on it as they go. So I encourage you to be patient with your lenders and with the SBA, as there is a great deal of demand coming into them for these loans. Also, when Congress drafted this legislation, they put in almost $350 billion in the PPP loan. That was where they were really encouraging small businesses to go to largely for these loans. They only allocated about $10 billion in additional funding for the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loans program. So you can see that there's far less money there than there is for the PPP loans. So just kind of keep that in mind as SBA is kind of going through this process and stuff as well. Now, the economic injury disaster loans are not a new loan program with the SBA. They've been around for years. So particularly all of you there along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and with hurricanes and tornadoes and everything else that come through, these are the loans that the SBA have had available for businesses to help rebuild after hurricanes or tornadoes come through, any kind of a natural disaster. What this legislation did, though, is they expanded this and are calling the coronavirus or COVID-19 a natural disaster in this case. And so they have expanded the loan program to include any program, any needs based upon the COVID-19 pandemic. Businesses with fewer than 500 employees, small business that is, nonprofits, including faith-based organizations, independent contractors, self-employed, all of those folks are eligible to apply for and be potentially granted these loans. A borrower can get up to $2 million in working capital loan for a 30-year fixed term at a rate of 3.75% if you're a business, or 2.75% if you're a nonprofit. Payments can be deferred up to 1 year, and loans can be based solely on credit scores. So tax returns are not required. There are no personal guarantees necessary on loans below $200,000, and there are no collateral required for loans under $25,000. Now, for loans over $25,000, just a general security interest in business assets will be used for collateral instead of real estate. Borrowers can receive, and this is kind of something we were talking about before the call officially began as well, there is the provision for emergency grant assistance through the EIDL loan program. Now, when this was first drafted, they have said, you could receive a grant up to $10,000, an emergency grant that would be paid out within a 3-day period of the application. That money can be spent on paid leave, maintaining payroll, increased costs due to supply chain disruptions, mortgage interest, rent payments, and other obligations that can't be made due to revenue loss. Additionally, if you're a business and you get one of these grants, but it does not have to be paid back if you get the grant. It is a grant, you do not have to pay it back. And it also applies that even if you apply for the loan but do not get the loan and approve for loan, but you do get the grant, emergency grant, you can still get that. One of the things I want to mention about that, we've received clarification from the SBA this week and late Friday of last week. There was some misunderstanding about this. Initially, there was the interpretation that if you applied for the emergency grant, it was a flat $10,000 emergency grant. SBA has come back since then and has said that what is intended there is up to $10,000. So let's just say you're a small business, you have 5 employees. You are eligible up to $5,000. So in essence, it's $1,000 per employee up to $10,000. Now, if you have 20 employees, your maximum amount of that grant is only $10,000 still. Businesses can get both the EIDL loan and a PPP loan. The difference in that is, or the situation in that is, if you remember, the PPP loans are really only used for 4 things: your payroll cost, or maintaining your payroll cost, paying your rent, paying your utilities, and interest on your mortgages. If you have an EIDL loan, those same 4 things can be used for the EIDL loan payments, but there's also the addition of any other expenses that have come up, with disruption in your supply chain and other people that you owe money to, that for assets and things like that, I guess, in your business. There's more that you can use the loans for. So businesses can have both, but they just can't use both for, say, payroll. They could use one for payroll and the other loan for those other expenses, perhaps. You could also merge the 2 loans together. Now, if you were a small business and you received let's just say $10,000 emergency cash grant because you've got, let's say, 12 employees. You got the $12, you've got the X number of whatever your loan is in the EIDL loan, and you've got a PPP loan as well, based on your 2.5% of payroll cost and the 25% addition to that. What you can do is you can merge those into one loan. However, if you got that $10,000 cash grant, again, it doesn't have to be paid back unless it is merged together with the PPP loan. Then that $10,000 cash grant really, in essence, goes away, and that is deducted from the overall loan combination together. I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't muddy that up. But if you have 2 loans, merge them together, but the grant comes off the amount total and in essence isn't forgiven at that point. These loans are done through the SBA. Again, you have to go through there to get these loans, not your lender when applying for the emergency disaster loan. So I'll just simply say you can flip the chart or the next slide if you want to. It's referring to paid sick leave. That's from the Phase 2 bill. And if you want to flip to the next one as well, it is regarding the paid family medical leave as well. And last slide, if you want to. This again is just some of our, you've actually included that. These are some links that the chambers there have included, including some of our links to uschamber.com, again, /coronavirus or co, uschamber.com co. That's a great site for small businesses specifically. All of these resources that we have on our website are there as well, and much more material for small businesses in particular, articles and other things that kind of help you beyond this coronavirus pandemic that we're going through and the current existence that we have ourselves in now. So I've kind of flown through there, guys. I'm sorry if I've talked too fast. I've I hope I haven't confused people anymore, but let's stop there. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the paid leave. I'm happy to cover some of the things that maybe I kind of quickly ran through, or maybe things that I didn't. I'm happy to try to answer any of those questions for you. So with that, Rachel, I kind of turn it back over to you.
Sure. So one question we received is an elected official, city council, board of supervisor who's also a small business owner eligible for the EIDL or the payment protection program?
They're a small business owner as well?
Right.
Yes, as long as they fall under those categories of fewer than 500 employees and meet the qualifications, then yeah, they're eligible to apply, even though they're an elected official. I haven't had that question, but as long as it's a small business, I think so. Sure.
Great. Sole proprietors that have IRS 1040 forms with profit loss forms included with the PPP application. I am only one employee. My banker says there is a pushback from SBA with sole proprietors that do not send out W-2s or 1009s. That might be
1099s
is what I'm assuming. Yes.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. I mean, I've had the question, and people have asked, can I, if I have 1099 employees, can I count them towards, my payroll cost in applying for loan and stuff? And the answer to that question is, and I'm going to try to kind of answer this collectively. If you have 1099 employees, you are not allowed to use them in your numbers in calculating your full-time employees. The reason being is those 1099, those independent contractors, those sole proprietors, they are all eligible to apply for a loan on their own. So in essence, it's trying to prevent double dipping from the business side, including them, and then the employer, the 1099 person as well, applying for their own loan as well. As far as pushback from the SBA on this, because they're a sole proprietor, I'm not quite sure why they would do it. I mean, these loans are for sole proprietors, small businesses, independent contractors, and so forth as well. So I'm really not quite sure. If Rachel, maybe to follow up with them, maybe if you want to shoot me an email after this, I can try to maybe find out a little bit more.
Sure.
But if it's what the SBA is kind of interpreting or saying, I really can't tell you. That's again, we're still trying to find some clarification on some questions we've had over the last week or so from the SBA, particularly in regards to how chambers and 501c6s can potentially benefit from the EIDL loans and stuff as well. So there's still a lot. It kind of goes back to being patient, understanding that there's still some misinformation. I'll just give you an example, and this is kind of going to my point about some patience and understanding that the SBA, the lenders, and others are all kind of going about this as best they can with the information they have. The chief of staff of our Congressional Public Affairs Division up in Washington last week was on 3 different calls where he was presenting alongside an official from the SBA. And one of those calls, he had 2 calls one day and one the next. In one call with an SBA official, they said 501c6s were not eligible for EIDL loans, for example. That's trade associations and most local chambers. The next call he was on, the SBA person said they were eligible. And then the third one, the SBA official said, it's my understanding 501c6s are eligible, but I'm still waiting on clarification before I can confirm or deny their eligibility from more information from headquarters. So that's just one illustration, an example that they are still trying to find out the best information they can as well. Again, kind of using the analogy, the plane is already in the air and they're still building this plane. So it's a long example, not a great answer to what they're saying to your small business person in this case. I would just simply say, keep working with them as best you can and try and provide. But the bottom line, if they're a sole proprietor, I don't know why they shouldn't be able to apply and again, be potentially awarded approval of a grant or a loan.
And I think also what you're saying too is, don't take no for an answer, be persistent because the information keeps changing. Just like the thing about the $10,000. The law says up to $10,000, and now they've come out with a regulation that it's $1,000 per employee. That's not in the law. That's just some interpretation that the SBA has now made in their regulations, which has just come out.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that information kind of came to us just yesterday morning. So
So as it relates to the sole proprietors in your experience or what you've seen, how long is it taking for those SBA loans to go through and the EIDL loans to go through?
It's taking some time, and just a reminder that I don't know if I said it or not, and if I didn't, I apologize. If you have applied, again, the law says 3 days of application for those emergency grants for the EIDL loans to the SBA. What's now they're saying is it's not 3 days after you fill out the application and submit it. It's 3 days after it has been approved. So it may take a week to hear back. I've heard from some folks who said they applied for those loans with the SBA early last week and never did hear anything back. What we did hear is those, and this goes for the PPP loans as well, there's a massive backlog. Lenders are trying to get these things done as quickly as they can, but the demand is much more than they can do in a day's time. So I would expect days potentially. But one of the things that we kind of heard as well from the SBA on these EIDL loans is if you applied for a loan, particularly the emergency grant prior to March the 30th, they've asked people to come back and reapply because they changed the loan application or the grant application beginning April the 1st. That was when you would have to reapply for that emergency grant because the initial loan that you might have applied for did not include that because the law had not gone into effect on their end at that point. And that just reminded me of something else I wanted to say, and I cannot remember what it was. But anyway, so patience, it can take some time. I did hear just late last night that the EIDL loans are just now starting to go out. Late yesterday or today is the first day some of those loans are starting to go out the door from the SBA. So this has kind of been in effect for about a week now, and those loans are just now starting to go out.
Okay, does the PPP cover part-time employees?
When you're calculating your numbers, no, you cannot include part-time employees. It's for full-time employees is how you calculate those that your payroll cost. So yes, when you're calculating your payroll cost, you cannot include part-time employees.
Okay,
Can you verify that, please? Because I've heard some other people say that it's just if it's full-time equivalent or part-time, you count all your employees.
Tish or Rachel, somebody, if you don't mind, shoot me an email as a follow-up. I'll check on that. But the legislation says counting your full-time employees. Now, I had this kind of same question yesterday to one of our lobbyists. We had this discussion about that very question. And she was one of our lobbyists who were on the Hill working this as it was going through. And as she said, because I was getting a little bit confused because payroll, you can get unemployment if you're a part-time employee, and then you would calculate how you would calculate that as an employer for those part-time employees and submitting for unemployment is you would take 2 weeks of pay and take the average of those 2 weeks. So maybe 1 week they may work 6 hours a day, or in another they may only work 3 hours a day. However, they may calculate up over a 2 week period, their average for a 2 week period of work. That would apply for the unemployment. But it is our understanding, simply based upon the legislation, that when calculating your payroll cost and applying for those PPP loans, that you use the calculation to only include full-time employees. So shoot me an email. Let me follow up and see if I can get a little bit more clarification on the part-timers on those. But that's my understanding at this point, guys.
Okay. How does the EIDL program interact with or not the one that was implemented by SBA for areas and businesses affected by the blue-green algae incident on the coast last year, which has an application deadline of October 2020? I would assume it does not interact with that, but I'm not.
No, I think there again, the emergency disaster loans program has been around for a long time. There's also, we're starting to hear a little bit about some SBA agents referring loan applicants regarding the bridge loan program and stuff as well. So I really don't know how it would interact. This again is just a expansion of the existing loan program that the SBA offers. So I don't think it would coincide against it. I know, for example, I was on a call with some folks from Tennessee, and an SBA agent said that they were still trying to process some of the applications for those who were impacted by the tornadoes that went through central Tennessee, mostly around the Nashville area, back early in March as well. So they're kind of going through that process as well.
Okay, we have a question. Will we have any updates for unemployment for self-employed individuals? We were denied, and the state has not implemented any of those new online provisions for us. We actually have an unemployment video going up later today, Ms. Joanne. So if you want to look at that, that is directly with MDES. That might answer some of those questions for you.
I had heard somewhere that unemployed folks that wasn't open until April the 10th, but that's what I had heard. So that's coming up this Friday, that those applications could begin for self-employed. But yeah, let's look at that video and see if we get some clarification from that as well.
And
sure.
that is obviously that's a state issue or state program where the federal government has come in with the phase 2 and modified it with the CARES Act. There were expansions. Obviously, there's the $600 additional on top of what the state offers, but it has to be in an agreement with the state and the feds before that goes into effect. I know, for example, my wife, she works for a small dentist office. They've obviously been shut down. Her employer has already filed unemployment for all the employees. She's gotten 2 payments at this point, and neither have included the $600 from the federal government at this point. It's important to remember that the $600 in addition that the federal government has offered for unemployment benefits is sunsets on July the 31st as well. So if you're unemployed, even a sole proprietor, I have not heard a time frame in which those were available. Again, that would just need to be checked by your state agency. They would qualify, and if you were laid off between February the 15th, that's kind of when that began and goes through the end of the year.
Hey, what about hourly employees who are still employed, they're working, but all their hours have been cut back like 50%? Do they have any recall on lost wages that you know of?
Well, so their salary's been cut, I guess is what you said, Tish?
They're an hourly employee and their hours have been cut.
Are they considered full-time employees? I guess is my initial question, because then the employer, if they would then, I guess in that sense, it would be a matter of if their hours are cut, then their pay is cut. Is it cut more than 25%? And that would be one of those reduction issues with regard to forgiveness of the loan that you got through PPP.
And Tish, I think that person could apply for unemployment as well. From what I heard yesterday, for maybe some of those lost hours, but they're not going to get the full payment.
Okay.
That's interesting, Adele, because I have not heard that. What I have seen is,
I thought that's what I heard yesterday on my video, but it was long and there was a lot of information. So let's re-listen to that and make sure we've got it straight.
Well, and talk to the agency there in Mississippi about it, because what I have understood is if you're eligible and able to work, but you can't because your office is shut down, then you're eligible for that unemployment. But if you are invited back, or when you're invited, not invited, that's the wrong word, when you're brought back on, when the business opens back up, and things kind of go back to some normal, and they call you back, if you decline, you're uneligible. So if you've got a job there or you're able to telework, you're not eligible for unemployment. But yeah, that's a good question, Adele, and I would just advise confirming that with your unemployment agency there in the state.
Okay, is back pay for laid off employees for the time prior to receiving the loan allowed / expected to get 100% forgiveness?
Got another call coming in a couple of minutes. Back pay.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've not seen anything regarding back pay. An employer has to bring back employees between for the 8-week period. So then that kind of raises a question: after June the 30th, can they be laid off again? It's not the ideal and what the intent, but the legislation, I guess, says that. But if you're a small business person, you've laid off workers anywhere between February the 15th and April the 26th, then you have until June the 30th to bring those employees back and pay them at their full rate, or at least 75% of their full rate, to have their loan forgiven on the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. So I haven't seen anything about we're going to back pay you for that time. I'm assuming that if they laid them off, they could apply for unemployment, but once they're again brought back on and are able to work, then that pay starts back with the employer using those loans to do so.
Hey, Moore, let me verify something, because this is something employers are facing. When they talk to their employees, some of the employees don't want to come back because they're getting paid
More
better
money.
unemployment benefits. And so what I understood is that it doesn't have to be the exact person that you had employed before. You just have to fill the full-time equivalent positions.
The position. That's exactly right. It's kind of 2 points. So you're right. I've had that question. Does the employer have to bring back the person and fill that role, or is it they are counting the position and they will fill it with somebody else? And it's the position in this case. Now, kind of going back to where some employees don't want to come back to work because they're getting more money. If you recall, or maybe you even know this, but if not, there was a delay in the Senate passing this bill there at the very end. It was very close, not close, but it was. There's a real issue. There were about a half a dozen members of the Senate who were threatening to withhold the vote until they fixed the language. And the language at the time was a little bit more open. They kind of closed it by changing it, saying that these provisions where the $600, because if you add up $600 plus what the state is already offering in unemployment, for some employees, that is more money than they're making at their jobs. And so why would they want to go back? So in essence, it was kind of I'm making more money not working than going back to work. And so they changed the language of the legislation so that $600 in addition to what the state is offering once they come into an agreement with the feds about that sunsets on July the 31st. So starting August 1st, then that additional $600 is not there as an unemployment benefit. And this also goes to the extension of more weeks of paid family medical time as well as paid sick time that's covered by the federal government. Those end at the end of the year, and so those were not intended to be permanent extensions or expansions of those two programs as a result of this legislation. Those will end at the end of the year.
Okay, maybe time for one more question. And for those of you whose question did not get answered, if you want to email me, Rachel, RACHAEL at mscoastchamber.com, we will try to field those and get the information for you. But I think this is an important one to consider. And in your expert opinion, do you expect another round of stimulus funds package to be released due to the long-term impacts?
Yeah, no, just yesterday, and we had kind of felt that this might happen, and it hasn't happened yet, but this is what Senate leadership came out and said yesterday. The president said the exact same thing. They're looking at extending, maybe by the end of the week, an additional $250 billion. So another $250 to $300 billion will be allocated for the Paycheck Protection Program loan program. So there has already been so much demand, so much money allocated and loaned to small businesses. They are trying to address that by adding more funds to it.
Great.
And just a quick, just something else to point out. Last Thursday, because Adele was talking about timing of certain things. I think it was unemployment in this case, but last Thursday was when small businesses and sole proprietors could begin applying for and receiving the PPP loans. This Friday is when independent contractors and self-employed individuals can apply for those loans as well. So they kind of staggered that out just a little bit.
maybe that's what I was thinking, not unemployment. So I may have been incorrect on that. You may have just answered the question. I
Okay.
knew it was something on April the 10th, so I correct.
Great, great. So yeah, we had a lot of questions about those independent contractors. So those folks need to probably go back in and look at that because they did stagger that for probably to not overwhelm the system.
Let me also add this real quick too. If you don't have a financial institution that you're working with, the Renaissance Community Loan Fund has now been approved as a 7A lender. And that's another resource that you can go to.
That's
And
great.
as I mentioned, I think before as well, the SBA came out late Thursday night, Friday morning of last week on their website. Ironically, I went through it before I got on this call looking for it for another chamber who had asked. It's not as easily to find again, but you can find it. It's called a loan finder. And so just click on that. It's a map of the country. You type in your zip code and it'll pull up the qualified lenders in your immediate area. So that's just another way to find who's available and who's making these loans in your area.
Great, great, great. Thank you so much. Well, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this call. Thank you all. I want to thank Moore, of course. His time's very valuable and we appreciate his expertise. Thank Tish with the Hancock Chamber and thank Adele Lyons with the Mississippi Gulf Coast Chamber of Commerce. I will also note that all chambers are constantly putting out content and information on our Facebook pages and through our websites. Please stay tuned to those or spend some time on those and get acquainted with them because there's some valuable resources on there for you. Anything else you guys want to add before we close out? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we will have this recording posted later. Yeah. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Thank you, guys.